Hello and welcome everybody back to Practical Inclusion. You'll see I'm coming in from a different spot today. The house has been renovated. I'm at my dad's. I've got a little light set up, so we're making do. We'll see. I think his internet's holding up pretty well. Firstly, I do want to acknowledge that yesterday was Invasion Day here in Australia. And so for those who are watching perhaps from other countries and aren't aware, Australia does still officially celebrate colonisation, essentially, in what is officially called Australia Day. That happens on the 26th of January. There is, however, fortunately, a really strong movement that's leading people away from celebrating that day. And we saw a lot of people yesterday and workplaces empower people to actually work the day. And therefore take another day off during the year. And a lot of people use that time to go and attend Invasion Day events, Survival Day, which is what it was called here on Wadawurrung country events. And I think we are seeing such a significant shift. And I think, to me, one of the biggest yardsticks really was that Kmart, of all places, didn't sell any of its Australia Day paraphernalia that it usually sells. And I just think that's such a yardstick, right? That an organisation like that, who would have a very strong target market of people who want that stuff, chose not to profit from that. So there are small steps, but they're important ones. And so, a big acknowledgement to the Wadawurrung people whose lands that I do get to live, work and play on. And hopefully we'll see some even bigger changes next year around this day. Femily, I know it's not tradition necessarily in the US to acknowledge country. Do you have, what do you do in that space?
Yeah, so you'll see, hi friends, I'm Femily, she, they pronouns. You'll see that I put San Francisco and then also the land, we're on the unceded territory here of the Ohlone people. And there's something that is gaining movement here, which is paying your land tax. And so the money goes right back to the original, to the descendants of the folks who lived on the land originally. And so here in the Bay Area, it's called the Shumi land tax, but there's also a way in which you can go to native.ca and figure out whose land you're really on and how to give back and give land acknowledgements, whether you're camping or you're phoning in through a Zoom on the land also. Yeah,
excellent. And I have heard certainly heard some similar things around here around pay the rent. Is what it's being called here. Right, so let's jump in. As usual, for those who are watching live or on the replay, and I know we'll have some new people watching in today, you can absolutely post comments and questions as we go along. Even if you're on the replay, do it, because we'll absolutely get back to you. We really enjoy the comments and the questions, and even just your reflections on some of the topics that we're talking about or resources you might want to share. So please feel free to do that. As I always do, I'm going to get my guests here to introduce themselves, because that might be seen as me being lazy, but it's not. It's deliberate. It's about storytelling, right? And we know that with diversity, equity, and inclusion, the biggest thing that creates change is sharing stories. And being able to see the world through other people's perspectives. So, Femily, I'd love you to introduce yourself through story, and you can take as long as you like or as little as you like to do that.
Okay, perfect. So I'm Femily, and I am known as Silicon Valley's gender inclusion advisor, and Silicon Valley meaning I help mostly startups and mostly tech. And I also identify as a member of the queer community and as a Jewish person in an anti-Semitic world. I always add that on there. And as an anti-racist white person on the journey. I try to say on the journey because it's those of us white people are so far from ever being in a place that's like, I'm 100% anti-racist. It's a mindset and an action oriented ability. So I identify in that way as well. I have been a feminist and a sort of rabble-rousing community organizer from as early back as 6th grade when I started a Save the Whales Club, which is not about feminism, but it is about organizing. It did not go well. I had 0 members except for myself. And so then fast forward, I learned about grassroots community organizing when I was doing reproductive health and abortion organizing in Boston, and really learned a lot from the grassroots organizing people there. And let's see, I did my master's in gender and cultural studies, and then went into the world of management consulting, communications and management consulting. And I loved looking at organizations through a methodical, evidence-based approach to help companies change, whether it was to scale up, scale back, get a new payroll system, and do diversity, equity, and inclusion changes. Like, that really lit me up, because it's systems, and it's actual humans, and it's psychology, and it's sociology, and it's groupthink, and it's individual think. And I was like, oh, this is so good. But I was bored to tears by helping people get a new payroll system or do tech, like behind the wall kind of admin changes. And so I slowly shifted my practice just into diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mostly focus on gender, and by which I mean advancing women. And also a huge chunk of my business is elevating the queer and trans community and gender nonconforming people in the workplace. And when work comes in that is about racial justice or helping communities of color in the workplace get a fair shake, I refer that out to practitioners of color, primarily Black practitioners. Although when I'm working on gender and orientation, I'm absolutely weaving in an anti-racist lens and intersectional lens. So that's where we are today. I also, being a practitioner in the field, I realized we didn't have a lot of community, professional community, thought partner community. And so where we could share best practices and worst practices, and just be really honest about what's working and what doesn't work, share research. So I started the American Association of Corporate Gender Strategists. And that's, there's a lot of parallels with the work that Bree does. And so that's something else that I run that's related to this work, where I get to interface with other people who are making this good work happen in corporations and in the world.
Yeah, awesome. We'll definitely talk to that, because I know there'll be people listening who are really keen to hear more about that.
Sure.
I really like the connection. Like, I guess it'd be interesting to explore further that, originally organizing, right, and in that kind of advocate space, and then that little kind of corporate period of time, and now being able to kind of do both, right? There's such a strong link between corporate DI work and advocacy. And it can be a hard kind of world to balance at times, right?
Especially for folks who are on the inside. My heart goes out to the HR people, and I know you have a lot of people watching from that world, and also, people who just happen to have a job in a company but care deeply about these issues. It's so hard to be within the company and trying to push forward those changes, especially because HR, you're supposed to be on the side of the company, and then also pushing things forward that sometimes your leadership doesn't think is on the side of companies. So yeah, I mean, it's very tricky wherever you sit. But for me, I figured out that I'm really good working in the belly of the beast. I'm really good working with leadership to try to make changes in corporate, as opposed to being someone outside. I worked for marriage equality, gay marriage in the US for a while, sort of knocking on doors and waving signs and doing real activism stuff. And I found that my voice was the loudest and the most resonant when I was in talking to city council people and state legislatures, sort of like from the inside, changing things from the inside. So that was my first peak. Yeah.
Yeah, I really strongly relate to that. I know that I am not the grassroots activist. It's not where my skill strength lies, but also find that there is space to be doing that advocacy work, but in those corporate boardrooms and those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested for us to talk a little bit about gender equality, particularly around, there's a lot of similarities between the US and Australia, but there's also a lot of differences too. But what struck me, doing a little bit of research this week, that was the tendency for us in Australia is to think that maybe the US is a bit further along the gender game than us. But when I looked at the stats, they seemed almost identical. So particularly in the tech world, I think it's around 28% women. That's exactly the same stat in Australia. And so that really fascinated me. So I'm interested to hear from you what you think is really some of the sticky barriers that we're just not, despite all the work we've been doing in this space, that we're just not quite overcoming.
Yeah. So first of all, that 28%, as I'm sure you know, is not out in the roles of sales and engineering. When we look at those are so much more male majority. And so women, especially women of color, queer women, et cetera, are often the onlys on those teams, a devastatingly high pressure situation for people who are just trying to get their work done outside of a toxic environment. The big sticking points. So there has been, people are willing, in the most part, people, and I mean, male people in charge are willing to say, they know that gender equality is important, and they're willing to say a statement and also say, yeah, we'll hire an amazing woman if she comes in the door, and like, sure, let's open our pipeline, blah, blah. But when it comes to them looking at their own privilege and how they've solidified a male privilege situation at the top, and also it's usually hand in hand with the white privilege situation, they're not really willing to, I was going to say relinquish power, but that's a little vague. They're not really willing to slow down for a moment the progress of the panic of the business to, for example, build out their pipeline a little more to find women to then interview for the chief financial officer position or VP of engineering, et cetera. So women are welcome. And also, let's not even talk about, gender nonconforming people. No one's talking about that in general in these, like, that's why the stats are men and women, because we haven't been really tracking gender nonconforming people in the research. So just to give a voice out there that that's part of the picture that is not even for the most part being talked about. But women, as long as we don't change anything about the business or anything that men in charge are doing or get to do, then women are welcome to be advanced. And another sticking point that I see is people want to change women, but they don't want to change the company, and they don't want to change men. And what I mean by that is people come to me all the time and they say, hey, we don't have enough women in leadership. The women are saying that they wish there were more women in leadership. Can you come give a workshop to these women on how to be women in leadership? And I was like, absolutely not. These women are great. What's not great is whoever's not promoting them when they're talented people already. And what's also not great is you have no accountability structures in place or consequences for people who refuse to promote amazing women.
Yep.
Is that what you think also?
Here. They say absolutely not, but I'll happily train your men if that's what you want. It's just 100% agree. And I think I remember you saying that when I was part of, and I didn't introduce this, that I was actually part of your thought leadership program, I think 2020, but I couldn't quite remember the year. COVID just seems like this, everything into one. But I remember you saying that, and I was like, oh, absolutely. Like the conversations that are constantly having, and they say, oh, we've been running a women in leadership program. Like, right. So maybe we'll stop that because the money that's going into those programs to fix people who don't need fixing, when really that money and that resource needs to be focused on looking at the systems, absolutely, and the people who are doing the promoting. So I can't agree more.
And also what you're saying reminds me also women's conferences outside of, not within the business, but like women in business conference, blah, blah. Their main keynote speakers are always women trailblazers, a lot of times white women trailblazers, who are going to just share their story as though what the rest of us need is inspiration from a trailblazer who somehow was able to break through it. Like, that's not helpful. It's also so blaming of us. Like, oh, if I just had a little more inspiration, then I could be at the top of this organization. No thanks.
Yeah, exactly. And you hear that message that women and gender diverse people are absorbing, right? Because they say it back. Oh no, my workplace is fine. It's just that I need to do this, or I need to build this skill, or I need to, like, no, you're absorbing that message yourself. That's actually incorrect. You're fine.
Yeah.
It's other things that need to change. I'm really keen. So that's one thing that doesn't work that I think we're both in agreement on. What things have you seen or have you been involved in that you think are actually making significant changes?
Okay, so almost every client I've ever worked with, when they get there, they say, look, we don't have enough data to show you, so we can't get started, or like we can't do anything really. So that's why they spend all their time like just bringing in interesting speakers and having interesting discussions, because they're sort of waiting for the head honchos to give them the data, or to start benchmarking and collecting it again or something. So that isn't not work, but what is working is when I help them see that the state of most companies right now, especially in tech and other male majority companies like law and finance, the state is so severely not working for marginalized races and marginalized genders that you don't need to know the 0.00702% in which this group is not doing well on evangelism within the employee survey in order to make a project for change. You can take a quick peek. Even if you've never tracked on race or gender, you can take a quick peek and ballpark, oh, there's no one of color in the leadership circle or the top 3 tiers. It's real paltry in terms of gender diverse characters, women, etc. And then you can start projects that change that right away without knowing precise details about that. You can realize this is a very urgent situation, and it's time to just get moving on interventions before you even have data. Gather data along the way, but that shouldn't stop you from starting a Black and Latinx recruiting program or women. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and perhaps for kind of, certainly in the Australian context, there's been some legislative requirements that have forced us more and more to go deeper and deeper into data, which I am a strong advocate for, but also I really like that point that there is a bunch of things that we just need to do, and we don't need to be thinking and talking about. We just need to do it and fix it.
Right. Like, we don't need to know who's affected by the fact, or how many are really affected by the fact that you don't allow people to choose their pronouns when they're applying in the computer for your job. Like, that's a low-hanging fruit. You need to be able to pop your pronouns and your gender identification into anywhere where someone else is putting woman or man, right? Like, that's just a given. You don't have to know how many customers do you have, how many potential applications do you have that are in the community of using she, they, them, whatever. Yeah.
Just fix those things. Yeah, I like it. There's something that you said that really resonated early on. You said that one of the key barriers was that people don't want to slow down the panic of business. And I think this is a great one, because we know, particularly when it comes to, in those really male-dominated areas, that the number one response, or the number one pushback to this is people don't apply.
Yeah.
There's no pipeline. And so you say, well, then let's address the pipeline. And of course, that's a long-term issue. And as you say, people don't want to slow down the panic. So they go, oh, well, we'll have to do that next time.
Yep.
We'll just keep doing things as they are now, and we'll build a pathway or a pipeline program down the track, which actually I don't see happen. It gets
never
relegated. Yeah. So what do you have? Do you have any thoughts around how to, you're working predominantly in this space of tech. How do we address that?
Okay, so there's a couple things about the pipeline. Don't let it panic you, because for starters, if all of my industry or yours tried to fix the problem of there aren't enough women engineers in the room compared to the general populace or the population of engineers graduating from graduate school or undergraduate. If all of Silicon Valley, for my industry, wanted to fix it at once, they couldn't do it because there is a pipeline at the industry level, right? However, most companies are just talky talk, not doing anything. So if you're one company who's hiring, let's pretend 50 engineers this year, even if it's 100, even if it's 300, wanted to do it in earnest, they could. So there's not a pipeline problem because you're trying to source from the entire industry, because most of your competitors are not truly doing it in a way, everyone says they're doing it, but people are not doing it in a way that's based on evidence-backed methods that actually work and that actually get women in the door and that actually get women to want to stay and work in your company. So first of all, that's the first thing about the pipeline. Don't be intimidated by it. If your one company wants to do it, you can do it. Second of all, you've been building, most companies have been building their pipeline of white talent, male talent, straight talent, et cetera, majority talent forever, right? For as long as the company's been there, for as long as the people in the company have been alive and like going to someone else's fraternity party, et cetera. And so having access to a group of people that you trust and know and believe in their work, it does take a long time to build. However, so the pipeline, the broken pipeline is not happening at the industry level. It's happening at the people in the company level. Their pipelines are broken. In the US, 80% of white people only know other white people in their inner circle and that they would recommend for a job, or that they would be like, hey, I need to borrow sugar, or like, can I borrow your car? Like people that are really in their circle. So that's problematic, obviously, in terms of race and recruiting. However, what it does mean is that 20% of your white people do know non-white people who are in their circle. So it's important to create, even if you have an all-white company, create a bonus structure where the referral bonus is much more if someone brings in an underrepresented talent, marginalized races and genders, et cetera, to incentivize and to spell out very clearly that this is what you're trying to do, and to incentivize those people that are willing to tap into their networks in that way. Yeah.
That's a great one, and certainly not something that's done in this country. So something for listeners to consider and think about.
Yeah.
Daniel's given us a comment over on LinkedIn that organizations don't want to change. Try being a person with disability and asking for ergonomic equipment or reduced working hours. And that's absolutely a key issue here in this country, is that just the basics for people with disability aren't being provided off the bat, let alone what we really need to be talking about. And for those Australian listeners, if you aren't tuned in and following the Disability Leadership Institute, please do, because that's where the conversation should be. Where are our leaders with disability? Because there are just too many barriers in place that we need to be addressing, not just from people with disability need to get employment, they actually need to be leading our organizations as well.
Absolutely. Especially in product, especially in marketing, absolutely. Thanks for the question, Daniel.
Yeah. Great. So I'm conscious that we're coming very close to time, and I do want to hear a little bit more about that corporate gender stuff that you were talking about earlier, because I know there'll be a lot of people listening in who'll be keen on that. I've certainly been part of a program of yours before, and not to turn it into a crazy sales pitch, but what I really appreciated about it was the intersectional lens that you place on the work that you do. Even though there is a gender focus, it's very much an intersectional focus.
Yeah, totally. And so this is a 7-month program that starts in May, and it's basically for people who care too much about issues of gender inequality in the workplace. And I mean gender across the whole spectrum, right? So yes, advancing women, and also queer and trans people, gender nonconforming people, everything related to gender in the workplace. And so we do, it's a container of support where it's very confidential. You don't even have to share your business if you want, because we have HR people in there who want to be able to speak frankly and be like, my execs are doing this. What would you do if this was it? And they're just like, my name is Candace. And they're not saying, that they're from GoPro or where. Like, they're not saying where they're from. So It's a community of support for people who are doing this work so that we don't burn out and so that we can refresh each other with new evidence-based, it's all evidence-based ways of making change within companies. Yes. So at corporategender.org. We do focus on the US, but as you said before, Bree, there's so many things that we can learn from what each other are doing, what our countries are doing in terms of gender, and what we're missing and the gaps and stuff. So your viewers are very much invited. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. No, I totally agree. I think there's a lot to learn, and there's a few US participants in our DI network as well that are just bringing such incredible knowledge. We've just got a question come through from Clive. Hi, Clive. Good to see you tuning in. Where does commitment to equal employment opportunities sit with positive discrimination to increase gender-based hiring?
Yes, I'm trying to, let me make sure I get what your question is. Let's see. Like, how do you increase the number of women and other non-male genders while also not getting in legal trouble? Is that I think that's the question. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So basically what we're doing right now in companies that are overrepresentative of men or who have far more men than women in roles where women, like in tech and engineering, where there are 38% of master's students in computer science are women. And so most companies don't have 38% in engineering. So we're overlooking women right now for so many roles. We're overlooking women, trans people, queer people, et cetera. So we're overlooking women. Yes. And so we are just trying to stop overlooking women. We're not going to start overlooking men. We don't have to overlook anybody we just want to have a much broader lens to look at all the possible candidates that can come in for interviews and consider working in the companies that we're talking about here. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. And the way sometimes that I talk about it is we're just leveling the playing field. We're never actually tipping the scales the other way. No. That's not really possible in the current structure anyway.
Yeah. Some concrete tips for that are when you're creating a short list, which happens a lot more in leadership roles, make sure that expand your short list. A lot of times in male majority fields, when you say, hey, let's create a short list, the people that come to mind are the people that look like the people at the top. Just that's a way that our brain is working, pattern recognition. And so then we say, oh boy, it's a lot of gentlemen and not enough everybody else's. So let's think to ourselves, who else could we put on? And then once you do who else could we put on this list, other amazing top talent names come to mind that just weren't there when we had the glasses on of who fits the pattern of who's already on top. So it's expanding the short list. And then as you get towards the final round of interviews, ensuring that you have two top talent women in the final pool, and also works with race. You can Google two in the pool. It's a study that Harvard has talked a lot about that I'm sure lots of your HR people know about, but ensuring that there are two top talent women in the final pool to choose from. So it's not saying you must hire a woman. It's saying you must consider women in a new way. Yeah.
Yeah. And we certainly know the evidence shows us that once we do interview women, that they do smash it. And so getting through that shortlist. And Clive, just to provide some Australian context, a lot of organisations are absolutely tapping into the special measures legislation that allows them to do things like affirmative action and actually women only positions, which it'd be great if that was extended to women and gender diverse people, but we're working on that, right? I'm afraid we're going to have to cut it off because we are at 10:30 a.m. for those watching in Australian Eastern Standard Time. Thank you so much, Femily. It's been so wonderful to be able to connect again and to chat with you. And I strongly recommend following Femily and learning more. And certainly the newsletters are incredibly helpful as well. I've learned a lot from them. So thank you. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. This year we might not be as frequent with these. They might not be every week. things are very busy, but that's okay. We'll get them in as often as we can. If you've got guests, if you've got topics that you want us to talk about on this show, please send them through to us. That's where we seem to get some of the best talent coming through, and the best conversations are from things that you're really interested in hearing about. So let me know, and we'll get those topics on. And enjoy your weekend, and we'll catch up soon. Thanks a lot, Femily.
Thank you so much.